Hi, everybody. Welcome back after the break. It is my great honor and privilege to welcome Janet Gregory, who will be hosting a talk at 6 p.m. The talk is building quality into your process and your product. Before we start, a couple of words about our amazing panelists. Janet is an Agile testing coach and a process consultant with Dragonfire Incorporated. She is the co-author, and together with Lisa Crispin, she wrote Agile Testing Condensed, a brief introduction, more Agile testing, learning journeys from the whole team, and Agile testing, a practical guide for testers and testing teams. Probably, as myself, probably you know these books and you read them. So Janet specializes in showing Agile teams how testing activities are necessary for the whole team to develop good quality products. She works with teams to transition to Agile development and teaches Agile testing courses worldwide. If you have any questions coming, please write them on the chat, because after this collection, we plan a 20-minute session Q&A. So if you have any questions to Janet, please keep them running. And in the meantime, Janet, welcome, and the stage is yours.
Hello, and I hope everyone is doing really well today. Welcome to my talk, Building Quality into Your Process and Your Product. And I am Janet Gregory. Just a little bit about me before we get into this. I started as a programmer. I did that for about 6 years or so. And then one day my boss asked me if I wanted to be a QA manager, mostly because I was the only programmer who was constantly asking to improve the processes. But that didn't turn out so well because I realized that they had no intentions of actually changing things. That's when I changed jobs and moved into Agile. My view of software development changed, actually almost about like 180 degrees kind of thing. So I started sharing what I learned because I was on several teams that were adopting Agile. And of course, my perspective was coming from a testing perspective by then. So I started speaking, writing, written 3 books now. But my focus has always been about quality. And I like quotes. This is one of Edward Deming's from 1982. He identified 14 key principles for business effectiveness. And I still believe that these principles are alive and well in effective Agile teams and organizations. The only real issue I have with this particular quote is that productivity is one of those words that is misunderstood quite often. This second quote is one of mine. I find that when I go into Agile teams, quite often when companies are first transitioning, at least, they concentrate on the speed. That's why they do it. They want to go faster. And when they do that, they forget about the quality. I think that if you focus on the quality, the speed comes naturally. This talk is it's come together over time because I've been exploring the relationship between development, which includes testing and also how we manage the quality of our products. I find that these two things today, the testing and quality, get confused. It doesn't help when we call our testers quality assurance, right? It doesn't help. It adds to our confusion, I think. But there is a relationship. It's a definite relationship, but they are not the same. So I'm going to talk a little bit about quality and then a little bit about testing and how I think it supports that quality conversation. The very last thing I'm going to bring in today is, can we or how do we measure product quality or process quality? Because there is a difference. And a little bit about how we can change that conversation. So let's start with a little bit about quality itself. I find that having this conversation is very difficult. So I'm going to use coffee as an example. And if you don't like coffee, think beer or tea or some other beverage. And I want some audience participation. I know you can't really do it, but you can use the chat if you like. But mostly I want you to think about it. I want you to choose which one of these 3 coffees do you think is best, or whatever beverage you've chosen. And I want you to think about, how did you know? Why did you choose that one? Why did you think it was best? Myself, I would probably choose number 1 because I like my coffee plain and black. But I do know that other people like it with lots of foam if they're having a good cappuccino, or they really like the pretty design. I know I asked my sister one day, we're having a conversation, and I said, so which coffee would you choose? And she, of course, chose number 2, and because that's her cup of coffee. And when I asked her why, she started talking about the coffee shop that she goes to and how it's served, and the barista just creates that lovely foam on her coffee, and how she likes to sit in the chairs there and meet people. And I said, just a minute. I said, stop, just stop. You haven't mentioned the coffee at all. The ambiance is what she was talking about. So how did you think about it? Did you think about the quality of the coffee at all? The beans, where it was grown, how it was roasted, any of those things? Or did you purely choose because of the taste? What about if I add this other dimension, price? Now, which one would you choose? Does it make a difference? Are you thinking about value for your money? Did anybody change their minds once they found the price? Did it affect your decision? When you add things like service in there, or the environment where it's served, would that affect your perception of which was best? Would you be willing to pay maybe 50 cents for a cup of coffee at a gas station, but maybe the same cup of coffee, or very close to the same cup of coffee, you would be willing to pay $5 for at a coffee shop? Value. Let's look at another perspective of quality. The most popular definition I hear is the one from Jerry Weinberg. Quality is value to some person. I like it, but I think it might be too simplistic and really understates some of the dimensions we should be thinking about. In the last few years, Alan Page and Brent Jensen have been talking about their modern testing principles. And their 5th principle is, we believe that the customer is the only one capable to judge and evaluate the quality of our product. Like Jerry's, it's a simplistic quality model. We haven't added in things like value or the structure around it, or profit, right? Defining quality is hard. And maybe it's not something we can define in one sentence. It's a big word, quality. And I think it changes meaning depending on the perspective you look at it from. So our customers, right? Do we even know who our customers are? Do we know how they use our products? We can use personas. That can help us. What about other stakeholders? And then there's the process. How well do we create our products? And I'm going to talk about this in a little more. But for now, let's think about product value. Remember that coffee? How much are you willing to pay? Are you willing to pay more for specific features like the pretty design, or the ambiance, or maybe it's the perceived quality of the product? The company also has a stake in it, right? Are they making enough profit? Companies won't stay in business if they're not making profit. Do they depend on volume versus price? We can think about watches here for a minute. A Rolex, definitely the price, versus an Omega, which they depend on more volume. There's so many pieces to the idea of quality. There's also the idea of quality attributes. And I think these are implicit when our customers buy our product. We do need to make sure that we're test these as well. For example, the smartwatch I was looking at a while ago, the battery life was something that was really important to me because my old one I was charging every day and it was a nuisance. Often the biggest risks are our biggest constraints. And that means that we need to address them for sure. And we probably need to test them a little bit more. And maybe our conversation starts here about risks, right? If you're doing a medical device, a pacemaker, for example, it needs to be working 100% of the time. We expect that. Another example might be data integrity. We carry a lot of data around with us these days on our smartphones or in lots of other places, right? We carry it. Some of us trust these a little bit more than others, but their customers expect that safety. We're plugged into the Internet of Things. It's hard to get away from it these days. For example, our customers trust that Alexa isn't sharing their most private moments. Or when you use your smartphone to turn up the heat in your house because you've been away, it won't accidentally unlock your front door. We expect safety. It's part of what we just do. And a lot of times we don't specifically make it something we test. There's many quality attributes, and I've categorized some of them into the most popular attributes into these three categories: operational, deployment, and development environments. I'm not going to talk too much about the deployment environment and the development environment, but we do have to think about these because these are part of how we build it, right? Now, a lot of times we think about our functionality and we might consider these general attributes and stop, right? If we think about these quality attributes, every one of them, as constraints on the system, if we consider them with each and every story, each and every task, that's how we start building quality into our system, right? For example, we think about robustness. I think about my smartwatch. I want it to work no matter what. If I'm jogging, not that I jog, but maybe gardening or pounding nails into a deck, I expect it to be robust, right? So sometimes it's about the materials you choose, and materials in software might be the language we choose or the platform we choose. How do we start building that quality in? Now, I want to talk a little bit more about testing now. I've said that testing is a process activity, right? But part of testing is understanding the risks. When we start to understand the product, the risks that go with it, the big picture, that's all part of the product quality as well. A lot of people say testers have a different mindset from others in the delivery team. I'm not sure if that's true, but I know we do have a tendency to question everything and look at things with a critical mindset. So maybe testing is about the people and the products and the process a little bit about all three. Now, there's a couple of definitions of testing that I'm going to share with you. This first one, taking measures to check the quality before putting it into widespread use. Yeah, it works, but it makes a little bit more sense if you're testing for viruses, say, than software. The second definition is specifically for software testing. It's a set of processes aimed at investigating, evaluating, and ascertaining the completeness and the quality. Now, I find this particular one very narrow in some senses, but so vague in others. It's a really hard definition to get your head wrapped around. Now, so what I think testing is about providing feedback. It comes in many forms. Finding bugs is really only one way of feedback. Hidden assumptions is another way of providing feedback, bringing them out into the open. Quite a few years ago, and I think this story tells it really well. Quite a few years ago, we were on vacation with my daughter and her family. My grandson was about four or five, I guess, and he was standing on the balcony. And he said, "Hey, Daddy, those cars, look at them, they're driving on the water." And his dad, of course, looked down and said, "No, Braden, they're not driving on the water. They're on a bridge. Maybe they just look like it." And Braden would go, "No, they're driving on the water." He was adamant. He was so sure, but his dad just kept telling him he was wrong. And they were getting quite angry, both of them. And finally, my granddaughter, she was 7 at the time, and she comes out and she looks and she said, And she said, "Dad, come squat down. Look at it from Braden's perspective." So he did. And sure enough, it looked like the cars were driving on the water. No question. And so then she said, "Dad, now pick up Braden so he can see what you see." And of course, the cars were driving on the bridge. Sometimes raising those hidden assumptions, being able to talk about them. Of course, you have to be open to looking at both sides. But a lot of times asking those questions can make all the difference in the world. Testing gives information about the state of the product, right? A lot of times we can't test quality in. I can't say, "Hey, here's a bug," and if nobody fixes it, it's just going to stay there. But I can tell you that there is a bug in the system and this is the risks around it, right? So you need to be kind of open about what it is you're testing, the state it is, being able to articulate it, because then we can start to think about the risks. Because if we find that there's a bug in the system or it's not behaving, people can make decisions based on that risk. So we need to think about business risk, technical risk, even the product risk. Testing can assess quality, but only if you know what that means. So you have to have that quality conversation first, right? And again, just a last note, testing can only give you information about what is known and information about the risks associated with it. It cannot assure, ensure, whatever else you might say. It cannot assure the quality. Now, the Agile testing quadrants is a tool. Them, along with all their variations, I don't care which variation you use, but it's a model to help us talk about testing. This particular model is just, it shows some testing activities. They're examples. Over the years, Lisa Crispin and I have adapted these examples as testing has changed, and it does change. The emphasis, I'm hoping, is on why we are testing. So the left, if you have not heard of the quadrants, the left-hand side is about guiding development, tests that take place before we start coding. The right-hand side is about critiquing. So code has been written, we are looking for bugs. The testing on the left-hand side is about preventing defects in the code, right? We're going to talk about it. We're going to guide development with our tests. The quality attributes that we talked about before are part of quadrant 4, that bottom right-hand side, right? And it's just a piece of the whole puzzle, but quite often it's a very important part that gets forgotten. As you can see, these tests are done by many different people, not only by testers. So we really need to be thinking about who's doing them, when are we doing them, and all kinds of other things. But the quadrants are a way to make it visible. It's a thinking tool. And we do need to fit all those types of testing in. Some will be at a task level, some will be at a story level, some will be at a feature level. Some might even be at a release level. Now, there's the whole shift left, shift right thing. There's a whole lot of people talking about that. And I wrote a blog post years ago why I don't like that term, shift left, shift right. But at that point, I applied it to a linear line because that's what most people are thinking. And I think if we keep thinking about development as a linear line, it's a mistake. I like the infinity loop. And I first saw it in Ellen Gottesdiener's and Mary Gorman's Discover to Deliver, later in the DevOps loop, and finally in Dan Ashby's continuous testing model. We test here and here and here. And Dan's model is the one that inspired this diagram. I can think about the left and the right as being two halves of the loop, but we're constantly moving from one to another, flowing quickly, sometimes slowly. Sometimes we need to stop and go back to where we started. For example, maybe we run a smoke test and it fails. We might have to go back to the building or maybe even further if there's something wrong in the design. Depends. I started using the term holistic testing because the word continuous testing kind of has been hijacked to mean automation. When we think of testing from a holistic point of view, we realize that there's many different kinds of testing. Those quadrants kind of give you a little bit visibility into the types of testing, but it doesn't really tell you when might be a good time. Now, in an infinite loop, there is no beginning, there is no end, but we're going to start looking at this a little bit closer at the discover stage, right? So we discover, thinking of an idea, we go through planning and understanding. The building is, testing and coding. We deploy, we release to the production at some point in time. We observe and we learn, right? So we just keep going around that circle, that infinite loop. But let's start, look at a little bit closer. We're going to look at that discover. This is about testing early. The very first testing that is completed is in the discover stage, and discovery by the business folks when they determine, does this idea even have value? They are testing their ideas. At least that's what they should be doing. Does it make sense from a business perspective? If an organization doesn't have a consistent message and their vision. This is sometimes where we see a lot of confusion with teams about competing priorities. A tool like mind mapping might help. When testers start testing, it is usually during the planning stage. That's where testers quite often get involved. And they can add a lot of value using their critical thinking skills and asking what-if questions. Perhaps they even facilitate a risk storming session if a feature has many unknowns. That's really important. Let's identify those. We can start to ask questions about the quality attributes. For example, we might ask about the diversity of who is using our product, because that can make a huge difference. Are we building in limitations without even realizing it? We can start helping to build, to break down stories, to slice those stories, because we're always thinking about testability. Tools that I like to use here are things like mind mapping to get a good big picture, or story mapping, or drawing a flow diagram to start slicing our stories. And we seek to understand. And that's where practices like acceptance test-driven development or behavioral-driven development really helps. I might use a tool like example mapping to help highlight some of the business rules we forgot. This is when we really want to involve domain folks, programmers as well, because they're going to be thinking about the instrumentation. What do we need to build in so that we can monitor and observe customer behavior? All of this happens before we start to code. Now, there's not room to put everything in a model like this, or it gets way too big and too much. But I might even think about test data here. Where am I going to get it? I might ask our domain experts to help. All of this is part of seeking to understand. So there's a lot of testing activities that are early in the cycle, as you can see. And we need to have those quality discussions. We need to know what quality attributes we have to consider as we build. We're going to test those ideas. We're going to highlight those hidden assumptions. We might even do user experience testing with real customers. This is all about preventing defects in the code. And this is where we really start to build quality into the products. As long as we are building the right thing, because we understand the problem space, we have a better chance of getting it right. These are those quadrant 2 tests, the ones in the top left of that Agile testing quadrants. So let's kind of look at the testing activities as we build. Building includes coding, automation, testing, not necessarily in that order, but I'm not going to dwell on this stage because this is a stage I'm sure you're the most familiar with, right? We're going to automate our checks, the regression testing, that is to get fast feedback. TDD, test-driven development, is all about design. You could call it test-driven design, but it is building in testability. And that's where we get those unit tests for really fast feedback. We can automate our business rules through the API. We can automate our workflow tests through the user interface. We want to think about our fast feedback. And fast feedback is something you will hear me talking about really often, because the faster we have feedback, the faster we can fix something and the better we will fix it. So I like to use show me's or desk checks, some people call them. So when a programmer's finished coding, they'll call me over and they'll say, "Hey, Janet, can I show you?" And I'll sit with them and they will show me. I will ask questions. I might even pair with them to help fix the bugs we find. So there's a lot of different human-centric testing activities that can happen in this stage. Things like exploratory testing at the story level, at the feature level. These activities that are on this page here are mostly about process quality. How do we build it? How well are we performing? They help to give us confidence that we're not introducing coding level bugs. But really, only 2 of these address product quality. If you're using personas for exploratory testing, you might be thinking about the product as a whole. Maybe when you're doing user acceptance testing, getting real users to give you early feedback. These are 2 ways that could be addressing product quality. Is it meeting the needs of the end user? The rest are really about how we build it. And that is a good thing. We need both because there's different kinds, different sides. So let's move to that right side of that loop. Code has been written. It's been deployed. We might have deployed it to the test environment or maybe to a development environment. I separate out deployments because this is where a really strong pipeline shows its strength. Whoops, sorry, I went a little bit too fast. I want to finish something. There are a lot of different testing activities, and this is where we often get an opportunity to test some of those quality attributes like load, performance, stability, even recoverability, right? Way too many to mention here. And the deployment pipeline gives us a way for that fast feedback. Oops, wrong way. I got myself all confused. Here we go. Now, this is a very simplified example of a pipeline, but you can see how thinking about which tests you need to run can be transferred into thinking about when they need to run and in which environment they need to run. As a tester, I like to help look at build and deploy results. I can help monitor some of the analytics kind of thing. And also thinking about the infrastructure that goes into that pipeline. Years ago, I worked with a team, a test infrastructure team, and they were set up to do that very specifically. We had physical environments, and they were testing the infrastructure. These days, we can spin up test environments, bring them down just as easily, and that's where we start to think about infrastructure as code. The code being kept in the same version control as the application. Now, our features are in production. Our customers are using them. We are getting real feedback. We're going to be watching our customers' actions and reactions. We're going to be monitoring events. And as we observe, this is where, remember that instrumentation I talked about early, working with the programmers to think about what events we needed. And then in the build cycle, actually implementing those. This is where it comes full circle. How do our customers use our product? Can we detect errors even earlier than our customers and fix them before they even know it happened? Ideally, yes. And then the last part of this cycle that I'm going to talk about is the learning. If we approach that learning with a scientific mindset, you know, we can form a hypothesis. I believe that if we do this, this is what will happen. We can try new experiments and constantly try to improve. I'm in the middle of reading a book called Think Again, and it talks about this. So far, it's really good, but I hesitate to recommend it because I'm not finished the book. But that's what we want to think about, is constantly improving. So that's it. That's the left side is about preventing defects in the code, getting fast feedback. The right side is about observing, finding those defects as quickly as possible, fixing them as quickly as possible. It's much more expensive than preventing them, but we do the best we can, and we will never find all the defects. It's also about feeding information that we learn from our customers back into the loop for discovery. Are we meeting the needs of our customers? Did we solve the problem we set out to? So looking at testing from a holistic perspective. Now, we have all of those feedback loops, right? And we can keep going and we can keep experimenting, but how do we know we get better if we don't measure? And so that's what we're going to talk about a little bit here. How do we measure testing? How do we measure our product quality? And they're both very hard questions. So I want to just kind of talk about it a little bit. In the chat, and this is how I need your active participation here. In the chat, talk about type in what kinds of things you measure. I'll be interested, I'll be watching. This is a list of things that I normally see. I'd like to see yours. The number of bugs, for example, or the severity of bugs, doesn't really tell me how good the quality is. If anything, it tells me how bad the quality is, even if it's trending, right? And none of these measures actually tell me the quality of the product. They're all about our process. Important, but nothing about the product. The state of DevOps has some really good measures for process quality, things like cycle time. But they are, again, about process quality. And I think teams tend to measure that because it's easier to measure than product quality. Now, Goodhart's law, when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. So keep that in mind when you're measuring something. An example that I often use is we have no unit tests, right? So this one team we were working on, we were trying to figure out how to encourage more unit tests. So we started measuring the unit test coverage. And that was good, but at a point, there's a point where you have to stop and think about what that is. Do we want to carry on? Do we have a goal? Is there a target? Because if you give that target, say 95%, your programmers are going to strive to meet that target, and they will stop thinking about what goes into the tests. I personally would rather have way less coverage with really good tests, because I've seen sometimes that what happens is we start getting a whole lot of assert trues in just to keep that number up. So be careful. Measurements can be tricky. Now, Isabel Evans showed me this graph at a conference a year or two ago, and it's the red line and the dotted line are showing two different products. So they're all measuring on the same attributes, the same functional features, effectiveness, efficiency, comfort. But the two products are aimed at completely different users. One set did not care about speed because they were scared of making mistakes. They weren't very tech savvy. The other group valued being able to complete tasks really quickly and wanted the flexibility. So the products were both aimed at people with disabilities, blind, deaf, different kinds of things like that. Now, the products essentially did the same thing, but the difference wasn't a price point, but an attribute difference. They were competitors, but not really, since they had a completely different customer base. They measured their quality based on value and user-based quality metrics, right? They knew their customers. They had very different individual personas they tested for. They both provided value for the customers they were targeting. Now, if I think about my coffee example, the customers are different there too, right? That black coffee for 50 cents, or $1, I'm not going to pay $5 for the ambiance of a cup of coffee. Well, some people do, but what is important to you? What do you look for? Do you know what your customers want? Now, there is no one right answer, as we just saw, right? But a lot of times we want to take the easy way out. Don't do that, right? Have that quality conversation. Margaret Deneen showed, and I thought this was really powerful, she showed me a way to start that quality conversation. And so I've started taking quality attributes. What is important to this product? And start with a list of 10 or 5. In this particular picture, I have reliability, accessibility, performance, and scalability. I might think that recoverability is really important. But take that, pick a sliding scale. Right here, I have 1 is the highest priority, 10 is the lowest. You can switch them around, I don't care, but make sure everyone knows what that range means. Then take it and give it to each of your team members. Have them fill it out. You can rank them, there's lots of different ways to do this, but have them choose what they think is the most important. And then all come together and talk about it. You may be surprised about what different people, and then that's where the assumptions come in. This person thinks reliability is the most important thing. That person thinks performance is. Somebody else thinks accessibility is. How do you come together and make that? An interesting experiment to take one step further is to take the same sliders and go up to your domain folks, your business people. Do they have the same idea? Then take it to the executive. Does your organization, does the executives all think the same thing? You might be surprised. As a collaborative, high-performing team, we need to think of the customers, and their needs will change, right? But it's not enough to make sure the product works. It needs to satisfy all the needs of the customers. So understand who those customers are, who are the stakeholders. If your teams aren't talking about quality first, you have a very unique opportunity now to start that conversation. Otherwise, how are you ever going to know what to test? How will you ever know what risks to consider? Or if you're considering the right ones? So let's kind of finish this up today. I'm looking forward to the Q&A part of this. It's always my favorite part. So quality is everyone's responsibility. That means that testing activities belong to everyone. Not everyone is going to be really good at every kind of testing activity, but figure out how you're going to do them all in your team. Again, I'm going to, that point number 2, you can point out the defects. I can tell the road construction people that there's a tree in the road, but if the defect is chosen not to get fixed, you get a workaround. And this is where A lot of times you'll get the attitude, I tested, I reported, not my problem. It's why the whole team needs to decide what it means to have a quality product. Can we fix those defects as early as possible? Could I jump out of the truck and move that tree and fix it immediately? Process quality helps, but it doesn't automatically make a product good. I love this statement. The nature of quality is complex and diverse. I really wish I remembered where I heard it so that I could give them credit. But really, that's what we want to do. We want to understand what we mean by quality, because it does not mean the same thing to everyone. So I've been talking about the whole team, not only the testers with respect to quality, a little bit about how testers bring essential skills. They can lead maybe the team in learning how to build quality in, but it is not their responsibility by themselves. Defining product quality really belongs to the business stakeholders, but testers can ask good questions. They can help them think about what is valuable to a customer. And there's also process quality. How do we build the product? This belongs to the team and the organization. It contributes to that product quality, but doesn't define it. Think about that coffee. We can we might like the taste, but there's so much that goes into that taste. When the coffee beans, or when the plants were planted, what elevation they were, when the beans were picked, how they were roasted, when they were ground. There's so many things, even up to the barista that might put that pretty design on top, right? There's so much more that goes into that taste. So when you think about your products, what do your customers look for? How do they judge quality? And this is where we iterate and put out learning releases, those small batches. You can get that fast feedback from your customers. And then you can think about how you and the team can contribute to putting that quality in. So fast feedback, collaborating for sure, visualizing your pipeline. I encourage teams to draw it out. Talk about which tests go where. Every time you visualize so that everybody can see, it makes it easier to talk about. And that's important. And then lastly, continual learning. To be able to do that, though, we have to have a no blame culture. This means the whole organization needs to be on board. Having that no blame culture enables people to innovate, get better. It means mistakes will be made, but really a lot of times when there's mistakes, we learn better. So use that scientific mindset, experiment, grow, and find new opportunities to make your product better. And with that, I'm just going to show you some of my my contact information so that you can feel free to send me an email if you like. I forgot to mention that my Twitter handle was on every slide or most slides. Please, I look forward to hearing from you, and I look forward to the Q&A section. There's also some of the references I talked about here. You can take a quick snapshot if you like, and I'm sure that this will be recorded and shared. So for that, let's go to the Q&A, and I hope you have a good day and are having a great conference.
Okay, so we are live after the talk. We have Janet with us. Janet, thank you so much for being a part of our conference.
Well, thank you for having me.
We have some questions from the audience. If anybody has anything they would so like to ask about testing, but they are ashamed to do so, please don't be. This is the perfect moment. Drop them on the Slack. I will have a look. And let's start with one of the first questions. Do you measure technical depth? If so, how do you measure it?
Oh, you start with the hardest one first. I'm not sure you can actually measure technical debt. You can, to me, things like defects are symptoms of technical debt. So if you wanted to count the number of defects, in a certain area, that might tell you a little bit about how bad that code is. What I like to think of from a technical debt perspective is how much is it slowing you down? So if I was trying to add a new feature and I couldn't because the existing code was really messy, I might try to figure out a way to say, how much easier is it if we clean that up first? But it's not an exact measure. So I really don't know how you can. Like I said, bugs are a way of, it's a symptom, but I keep an impediment list on the wall. Is what things do we want to work on in priority order? And so the highest priority is usually the things that cause the most issues from a technical debt perspective. But I don't know if you can measure that.
That's true. So you visualize it?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. I might even take those bug clusters if we have a lot of bugs. I'm hoping people don't, but sometimes you do, is to say, we have a lot of bugs in this area of the code. Why? And that's a good way to say, hey, there might be some technical debt there. But how do you visualize it? Is it, yes. Keep it in the top of everybody's mind.
Yeah, and don't push it at the end of the backlog where nobody ever has a look, right? Nobody remembers.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so another question from Mateusz is, what do you say about zero bug tolerance? Would you say releasing with known but minor problems is a good trade-off for getting earlier feedback, or no? Why yes, why no?
Yeah, so I am a fan of zero bug tolerance. And when I say zero tolerance, I mean no defects, zero known defects, escaping an iteration or escaping your story. I like to fix the bugs within our iteration, within the story, whatever we're measuring. But to do that, you have to understand what quality means to you. And you cannot, which is what that whole talk was about. But how do we, if we know what quality means to us, what is the tolerance for the customer to have bugs, then we can make some judgment calls. But I'm a fan of fixing all bugs as early as possible because they're fixed so much better and with a lot less cost if you can do it within that iteration. If a bug gets out to a customer, because you cannot find all bugs, you can't ever. And if a bug gets out to the customer, how quickly can we fix it versus, how much pain is it causing them? We might want to just think about our mindset a little bit differently. If we make those decisions, and you will make those decisions about, should we put this out to a customer? Your question should be, how much is this going to affect them? Is it going to stop them? Can they live with it for like a day till we get a fix out? So depending on your whole release cycle, how fast can you get that fix might be part of that decision on, do we put it out there or not? So there's a whole lot of different things that go with that, but I truly do believe in fast feedback and fixing them as soon as possible.
Okay, so Mateusz, we hope this answers your question.
Yeah.
Oh, there are a lot coming in, so let's keep rolling. One of the questions from Bartek was, he's a fan of TDD, but in his company, they are not using it at all. So if like clients come to you and say, we want to like start in this path, like we want to promote it and get it rolling with and at their company, what's like the baseline you would advise them to do?
Yeah. So if I had a client coming and saying, we really want you to do TDD, we want you to do testing from the very beginning, and doing those things, I would take it as an opportunity to say, hey, let's do it. Now, if you have somebody on your team, if you're lucky enough that knows how to TDD, then start pairing and learning it and spreading that. If you don't, I would really suggest bringing somebody in to show you how, because it's not an easy skill to learn. I've heard, right? And so bring somebody in like JB Rainsberger, right? It's talking next. But have somebody come in and teach you how to do it, because that will make all the difference in the world. Because what I see is teams that try to struggle to do it, if they don't know how, they struggle and they just give up. We can't do it because they don't know how to start. So yeah, invest. But if a client's asking you, grab that opportunity, because it's
and go for it.
Great, exactly.
Okay. So to the person who asked this question, Bartek, if you have these kind of people who have these skills in the company, reach out to them. Don't be afraid to use them. Yeah. And if don't be afraid to ask for help, like external help, to have help set this up and learn as you go. Perfect. That's probably, that's a good one. Janet, what is your take on estimating bugs? How do you estimate? Do you use story points or?
So if there was a bug and it was a design flaw, right? So it's a big bug, I would probably put it in our backlog and treat it like a news story, because it's going to be big. So I would do whatever we do with our stories. I would story point it. I would put it through our whole backlog. If it's just a bug that's part of the story I'm working on, I'm not going to bother estimating it. What the question will be is it going to affect our iteration that we're in? Mm-hmm. If it's that big, then we need to sit down and decide whether or not we should carry the story forward, or should we pull it out to try to figure out what to do. But if it's just a bug part of it, sometimes I get questions about we don't have time. Well, not a question. They say we don't have time to fix the bugs in an iteration. And so I will suggest that when you're doing your capacity planning, when you're doing your iteration planning, if you consistently don't have time for bugs, it tells me that you're thinking that you're perfect developers, that everything is there. So add an extra task that says fixing bugs. That will be for the developers, it'll be for testers, it'll be for how much time do we actually spend on each story. I might say, if your stories are 2 to 3 days long, put in a task for a half a day and start measuring, is that what it really takes? Because that's how you're going to start making time. And then it's just all your bugs will go in there and you'll be able to see for each story what it is. I would never estimate a bug. I would just fix it as part of the story.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was I would say it's probably something a lot of people are asking themselves, but now since we have an authority stake on that, I guess you can just carry over to your teams, guys. Okay. Another goodie. Janet, how do you involve end users and business people in testing?
End users and business people. I involve them as early as I possibly can. So I'll tell a story about when I went into one team. It was the day they had released for UAT, user acceptance testing. And when I said, so when will they be finished user acceptance testing? And they said 6 weeks. It takes them 6 weeks. And I said, but our release cycle is 3 months. So half of the release cycle is on UAT. So it is like we were always half a thing behind. I said, that's unacceptable. It's silly. What I found was that the person who was doing user acceptance testing was doing it as when she had time. So she was doing her real job, plus doing this. So she would fit it in here and a little bit here and a little bit there, hence the 6 weeks. So what I started doing was I asked her if she could spare a couple of hours every week. So instead of doing user acceptance testing, 10 minutes here, 10 minutes here, could she spend an hour or two with me at the end of every sprint or every iteration? And so she did. She started coming over their office. We were lucky that her office was just a few blocks from ours. So she would come over every Friday afternoon or every other Friday afternoon, and I would show her. We would pair together and I would show her what we had been doing, give her time on my computer to understand. The next release, she put her cycle down to 3 weeks. So that was a huge improvement. And so I went, oh, that's not good enough, not good enough. So the next cycle, I convinced the powers that be to give her her own desk in our area with her own computer. And she started coming in a couple of times a week, at least once a week, and really understanding what we had been doing. I might do a little demo with her, but she really understood. The next cycle, her user acceptance testing was down to 1 day. She took a day off work and just sat down and tested. We put it on her test environment and she tested. So what I encourage people to do is, what can you do to get those customers in early? If you can't have them in person, then pair with them. Give them control over your computer. Let them get used to it. That is the best way to do it. And taking as little time. I did the same kind of idea with a person in France, but it was remote. Get them involved as early as possible. Hands-on. So definitely.
Yeah, so from like 6 weeks to 1 day, yeah. I would say everybody agrees that's pretty mighty impressive.
Yeah, it was. I was thrilled with that experiment.
Okay, so we talked about involving business people, and another question is about involving testers. So the question would be how to convince testers to test from the very beginning, more effort, more testing loops, and not to test only at the very end.
So that is easier to say than to do sometimes. But I find that when I explain to people, when I tell them the benefit of getting in early, how they can have input to how things are being developed, input into thinking about quality at the very beginning. If I give my tests to the developers first, how much benefit they get out of it, because what I get to test is so much better than if I didn't have that input. And when they start seeing the benefit of being involved early, and the biggest thing about any of this is to demonstrate. So I will say, let's form an experiment. Let's try this. I'll take one tester and we'll walk through that whole process, and we will show them and work with them with one developer on one story. And once they see the difference, they never question again, right? And if I have a tester that purely does not want to get involved early, then I'm really going to question the value of that tester. But it really is a good thing to just show them. It's like anything, right? TDD, show them.
That's true. And you can even try to engage testers even before development when the user story is written, right?
Absolutely. I did I was working with a company a while ago, and the testers were always after. And so when they first brought the feature in, they were bringing a brand new feature in, and they were going to do their normal thing. And I said, well, let's try something different. So before you ever even break down it into stories or anything else, let's take that feature, let's mind map it. Let's bring the testers in. And once the testers started being part of that mind map, and started asking some of their questions, especially about, that's going to impact that part of the system. Have we thought about that? All of a sudden, they realized how much bigger this feature was than they thought. And it was really eye-opening for everybody. So it's show them the value. Yes.
Okay, so we have room for one more final question to squeeze in, as we are almost out of time. The final question would be, Janet, you mentioned Deming, who talked about statistical control of quality. So do you use any statistical tools to measure quality?
So I don't, it goes back to how do you measure quality, right? If you can, so every time I've used statistics, or every time I've seen statistics, they can be manipulated to show whatever it is you want. Oh, yes. Right? And so I'd be very careful with what I am measuring and how I am measuring. I personally have not used any statistical controls, except if I was doing, say, hardware or something, where you have to be within a certain range. Then you can use that. But when you're doing software, it's not quite so easily measured. I might be able to use it, say, if we were trying to measure performance or something, and we had to be within this range. How can we take that and how can we be within that control range? I might do that. But generally speaking, the software is much harder. Can I quickly, and that's all I'm going to say on that one. And because somebody else asked a follow-up question on that, why would QA be the only one doing testing? And they're not. Please don't ever think that I think testers are the only one who should do testing. I just talked about the business people doing testing. I've talked about the programmers doing TDD. So it's never just the testers doing testing. So please never think that that's what I talk about. But they can add a lot of value.
Yeah, exactly. They're the pros. They're helping us.
Well, they're thinking. They use their critical thinking skills, right? Versus, yeah, not that programmers can't think critically, but when they're coding their own stuff, quite often they get that bias. When I was a programmer, I did the same thing, and so having a second pair of eyes on your code is a good thing.
Exactly.
Doesn't have to be a tester. Anyhow.
Exactly. Anyway, I guess we should wrap up because we are almost out of time. Janet, thank you so much for joining us on Agile by Example. Everybody, thanks for the questions. If you have any more questions after the chat, please feel to leave them on Slack. And that would be all. So thank you once again. It was a great pleasure, Janet.
Have a good evening, everyone.